Joining me now is Hadia Miramade. She's going to be with us at our Worldview Weekend coming up Friday night, October 3rd, Saturday, October 4th. Kash Patel testified this week, and he used a very interesting phrase. I want you to listen to it, and then we're going to bring her in to discuss what he said. And I think it'll apply to really how we deal with, quote, extremists, end quote, in the Islamic world and their growing numbers. And how can you identify them and what is causing them to grow? Listen to Kash Patel earlier this week.
Counterterrorism work, cyber attacks, and foreign adversaries are something the FBI must never sleep on, and we are not sleeping. In the counterintelligence space alone, this year to date, 30% increase in counterintelligence arrests from the DPRK, Russia, Iran, and China. And I want the American people to know, in this setting, there's a lot of work that the brave men and women in the FBI are doing we just can't get into, but they don't stop. Our cyber threats, ransomware attacks, those harming our children online. We have nearly a 20% increase in indictments arrests in 7 months alone this year. We're going after those that harm our malware, infrastructure systems, telecom systems, and energy structure. Combating SALT and Vault typhoons are just a little bit of the examples we're doing. Maybe most importantly, under the counterterrorism and domestic terrorism umbrella, are nihilist, violent extremists, and those that label themselves 764, who wish to go online and convince children to maim and mutilate themselves and commit suicide. And we are producing record numbers of arrests under that umbrella organization. We even stopped an individual in the 764 network who wanted to conspire to kill an adolescent girl. He is now in custody. Transparency remains one of my main...
All right, let's stop right there. Nihilistic, violent extremist, nihilistic. Life has no ultimate meaning or purpose. Nihilism. Life has no ultimate meaning or purpose, particularly if you evolve from pond scum versus being created by an all-knowing God who breathed into you and gave you a soul, a spirit that will live forever and be judged. The alternative is, this is all a mistake. We just came about by random choice of billions of mutations. There is no order. There is no creator. There is no judgment day. Life has no meaning, nihilistic or nihilism. Then you add the nihilism to violent extremism. Wow. Speak to this, please, will you?
So if you don't mind, I'm going to take your audience back a little bit in time so we understand the evolution of this term. In the mid-90s, when I started this research, so I've been involved in the intervention of radicalized youth, especially in Islam, since the 90s. So in the beginning, we were looking for Muslims willing to kill themselves for jihad, whether they were doing it domestically or they were going overseas. They were motivated by their cultural religious heritage within Islam. Fast forward to after 9/11 and the rise of ISIS, so we're talking around 2014 or 2015, we suddenly saw that there were radicalized American kids going over to fight overseas, no nexus to Islam whatsoever, radicalized and indoctrinated into Islam within as short as 6 weeks, going over and blowing themselves up in Syria. There were girls from Idaho, Missouri, deciding to become ISIS brides. Also, no nexus to Islam, deciding to convert to Islam, go over and become a Syrian ISIS bride. And this phenomena scared us because we could not track and identify them based on the communities they were a part of like we could, even during the time of 9/11 and the rise of Al-Qaeda. So ISIS, basically, these jihadi groups are always one step ahead of us. So fast forward to today, and when I look at people like Tyler Robinson and some of these other trans kids, we know there is a red-green alliance. And, you know, I texted you saying, I think there's a jihadi nexus to this. And so when I heard Kash bring up this term, because I haven't been involved in the research in this field for a couple of years, you know, since I came to Christ, and I realized that this is now the term that they're using to bucketing the jihadi groups, the anti-American, anti-establishment groups, the Marxist groups, the violent trans groups like you talked about with Shahram, with the Queer Alliance of Salt Lake City. The NVE bucket is the way they're looking to identify these groups and to study them basically as a cohesive network. And the scary part about it is they're not cohesive in the sense that their ideologies range from such a broad spectrum that it really worries me how we're going to address this radicalization threat. because we're no longer looking for just jihadis, but they're learning from jihadi methodology, if that makes sense.
Oh, it does make sense. So we should look for jihadis among white Caucasian kids, transgender kids. So in other words, the Islamists are now radicalizing our own,
Yes.
and which makes it very hard to find them. And then it makes people assume, oh, the shooter was just a trans guy or pro-trans. How do we know there wasn't some Islamic influence? And maybe he was just a really pro-trans guy. That still doesn't mean he wasn't equipped and pushed to it by jihadis, correct?
Exactly. And
Or
so
funded, right?
Funded. So the difference, the reason that these jihadis are always one step ahead of us is in ISIS, they converted them. So they converted them. So before they went overseas, we could identify them because of their Muslim rhetoric. So I was at FBI headquarters. I was asked to profile some of these individuals in which we had Guardian and investigation leads on. And I could tell by what they were saying when they had entered Islam. So
No, wait, stop you there. Saying on social media, saying in conversations that were captured, how are you seeing what they were saying?
Well, I don't want to go into too much detail, but the FBI has a lot more than social media at its disposal. So it was all sorts of conversations that had occurred. These were open investigations. And so I was looking for Islamic doctrine. I was looking for Islamic terminology. These guys are now morphed. They're one step ahead of us. They don't care whether they become Muslims. So we can't even look for that identifying factor.
Okay, stop right there. So the Islamists are Iran or Qatar. They don't care if they become Islamist.
Exactly. Exactly.
Is anyone else in the media out here saying this?
So the place I found it, interestingly enough, was my old colleagues. So I did the research based on people I knew that study what we call violent extremism. So for people who don't know where that terminology came from, it was basically an all-of-government approach under Obama that we didn't want to target Muslims. It was the same thing we used. I mean, it's government-wide. It is a terminology to avoid the implication of Islam. And so we built this network of like resources and threat management, threat assessment teams that could identify people engaged in terrorism or acts of violence that were motivated by a variety of factors. That wasn't just Islam. So that's why they're still using that term. And in this context, it turns out to be very useful because these guys are not becoming Muslim. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So they're not becoming Muslims. And yet the Muslims aren't not even probably trying to convert them. Is that what I'm hearing?
Exactly. So in a lot of circumstances, they don't even bother to convert them. If they have an affinity to Islam, then fine. But what they all have in common is the hatred of the Judeo-Christian foundation of this country, of capitalism, of free society. They see it as us versus them. Remember, that was always Al-Qaeda's narrative, us versus them. So what they've done is taken all of these disenfranchised, broken trans homosexual kids, the Marxists, all these groups, and lumped them with us versus them, and them being the Judeo-Christian establishment foundation of this society.
So if you have a red-green axis, the red being the Marxist, the green being the Islamist, and if you have China, if you have other Marxist groups pumping money into the U.S. to create chaos, to pervert our kids, to change our kids, drugs, the CCP is involved in drugs, pumping fentanyl and everything in here, right? And of course,
yes,
when you get involved in drugs, heavy drinking, pretty soon you do pornography.
CSAM. You'll hear Cash talked about CSAM, which is the sexual exploitation and abuse material, child sexual exploitation material.
Tell me more.
CSAM.
Tell me more about that.
So there's this nexus that the experts are discovering, and Cash referred to it as a 4.5-hour testimony. It took a long time to get through it, but so the nexus is between terrorist exploitation content, violence, the jihadi, the Hitler literature, the jihadi literature, the ISIS attacks, which is basically, we don't like them, they are not of us, we slit their throats. very similar to Hitler. So during Biden, they wanted to define this, and they still continue to try to do this as right-wing extremism because it's glorifying Hitler. They're not glorifying Hitler's anti-Semitic approach. They're glorifying his violence, his ability to subjugate a society. So they're taking figures like Hitler and like Osama bin Laden and other ISIS fighters to glorify the violence aspect, combining this with the satanic and the occult, the rituals of blood cutting, cutting symbols. Cash refers to that as the 764 group. There's also the O9A, the Nine Angles group. And they are combining the sexual exploitation of minors, identifying them through gaming platforms like Discord and other online chats, with the violence. Because you said something really important on your interview with Sharam about searing the consciousness. Yeah. And that's really what they're doing.
Okay, so why do they want to bring in sexual exploitation of minors? Why are they trying? Why is that? Why not have them involved in sexual activity with, people that are also their own age? Why do they have to get them involved with children?
Well, I think there's something debase about it. And again, I'm going to go back to the jihadi literature about, the pedophilia and the engaging of minors in sexual acts, right? We see them we see this happening in the jihadi world, in the Muslim world generally, about marrying minors, 9 years old, 11 years old. I've watched some horrific interviews from Qatar and the UAE about grown men, 45 years old, having a 9-year-old bride. There's something about the debaseness of it, the degradation of the human soul to engage in these kind of acts, so that the reason they're called nihilists is because at the very end, the bulwarks that prevent a person that's radicalized from turning to violence and valuing their life are eliminated. When nothing has value, the most sacred of your society, the children, don't have value, then life itself has no value. Why do these people commit murder indiscriminately? Because life has no value. Because God isn't in their lives. There is no morality code. Without God, there is no code of morality.
In the book Hitler's Cross, which I referenced the other night, about the acts of brutality and murder that the Hitler and Himmler would have the SS troops do in order to break them away from the family and make them come to the SS for all of their emotional support and community. They'd have cut them away from hearth and home by having them involved in extreme violence and murder, searing their conscience and breaking them away from the tradition of their church and their family, thus making them cohesive with others who had gone through this same thing. It's like creating a secret society, really. And here's
they are secret societies.
Exactly. And here's what Lutzer writes: to transform the men into non-thinking, unfeeling machines, Himmler, the head of the SS, needed to indoctrinate them into a secret society of their own.
Exactly. And so what I'm really worried about, and we've talked about the scholar Raymond Ibrahim, he did a really great podcast on this subject. What worries me is that when we define this all as left, we are basically legitimizing these very deviant behaviors. And he traces it back actually to the legitimization of homosexuality, which was always thought in civilized culture as being deviant. It's something the Bible has talked about 2,000 years ago, even before that, 3,000 years ago in the books of Moses. Is the problem is when you start to just bucket this as left, then this particular NVE group makes it left versus right, when in actuality, what it really should be is civilized society against deviance. So we should, and I don't know if this is even possible, we should be able to come together and say, this is wrong. This is anti-American. This is anti-civilization. This is anti-society. And we have to work together. Unfortunately, I don't know if our country could come back from the brink. And the longer this remains a left versus right issue, it's going to tear our country apart. Because if you recall, and we have to be wary of this, because if you recall, we just came out of the Biden administration. They were not calling them NVs. They were calling them RMVs, which is racially motivated violent extremism. So they took the cases of the guys, in these groups, and guys and girls looking at Hitler literature and calling them white supremacists because they didn't want to acknowledge they were looking at them to glorify the violence like you just discussed and kind of searing the human soul. They wanted to describe them as white supremacists, and they were pushing domestic terrorism laws. Those laws did not pass. They have historically not passed because the majority of Congress understands if we pass domestic terrorism laws, the first people it's going to go after are whites. And there is a danger for us to think that, okay, we want domestic terrorism laws now that we have Trump, because 3 years from now, we may not have a Trump and we may have a Biden again.
Yeah.
A version of that again, where those laws will be turned against us.
Which is why I'm very concerned about the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission, FCC, talking about Jimmy Kimmel's words, and this is not in the public interest and all this. Because, as I said on radio today, how long before the next FCC director is saying what Brandon House is saying on his 74 Christian terrestrial stations is not in the public interest or good for the community? We need to base it on, is the speech illegal? Is it terroristic threats? Okay. If it's not illegal speech, then you can counter it with more free speech. If the corporations of America, Sinclair, Nexstar, if they don't want it on their platform, that's their choice to have broadcasting standards of their own. But we don't need the government coming in and saying it's not in the public interest to have Jimmy saying these things right now. Well, is it going to be in the public interest when I'm describing the horrors of Islam after October 7th? Right? So
exactly.
This is a double-edged sword. And that's why I get really upset with the MAGA folks, because some of them, not all of them, because they only see things through the lens of the Trump administration and the MAGA agenda, not through the lens of how is this emotionalism? How is this politicalism? How is this going to be a double-edged sword in the next administration? But you guys had no problem canceling Jimmy Kimmel and using the government to do it when he said something about your guy. Now we got to get rid of Brandon House on terrestrial radio because he's saying something against a very prominent, respected imam, right?
We just went through this. I mean, people should have a long enough memory to recognize that the Biden administration was going after J6 and grandmothers, that were attending that were outside the Capitol taking pictures because they called us white supremacists. They called us racially motivated violent extremism, even though most of the people weren't even white. We have to remember the FBI memo going after radical Catholics. We don't want to criminalize speech. Look at what Tommy Robinson's doing out in England. Why are people getting arrested for praying outside of abortion centers? Because they're classifying Christian doctrine. I mean, the Bible is hate speech to those who are perishing. It's foolishness. So we don't want to criminalize speech. And I'm glad you've constantly pointed out what A.G. Bondi's doing in that interview, talking about criminalizing hate speech and stopping hate speech. We don't do that in America. We criminalize violence.
Yes.
So the Brandenburg test in the Constitution is your speech inciting imminent violence?
That's right.
Are you advocating violence against a group? That is a criminal act that we prosecute. But we don't want to prosecute just ugly speech.
100%. Now, I want to keep going on this violence. So violence, they study Osama bin Laden, they study Hitler. Then you add the occult in, whether it's reincarnation, you could die in this process. It doesn't matter. You'll come back in the next life. Or sacrifices. These are you're offering up sacrifice. And we know in the case of the Nazis, Hitler, as a young man, wrote a play about sacrificing people under the oaks, right? It was an occultic ritual to the Babylonian gods of human sacrifice. And that's why people like Dr. Mark Musser did the excellent book, Nazi Ecology, saying the Nazi ecology was largely a green agenda where the Jews could be sacrificed for the better of the environment. And we know for a fact that those SS troops were being told about reincarnation. You're giving the Jews a chance to come back in something better, but their kosher diets, their bloodletting, this is all damaging to the environment and Mother Earth. And there's so many parallels. So you add the violence, the occult aspects of it versus the practitioner versus the one they're practicing it on. Then the exploitation, the sexual exploitation, whether it's minors or whether it's same sex and LGBTQ to sever the conscience. Now let's add in, what is the ultimate goal? Lutzer goes on to say that he assured them, Himmler, that a master race was developing. And if the inferior races stood in their way, the scientific belief in the survival of the fittest dictated that these races had to be exterminated. Indeed, they were on a divine mission to create a new man and could only do so if these subhumans were prevented from multiplying and populating the earth. To refuse an order was not even to enter their minds. The mystical rituals bonded them to the conviction that they were all members of the elect. So they were going to create a master race. Nietzsche's Superman, Charles Darwin's,
social Darwinism.
Totally. The select races. What then would these guys, if they have violence, occult, sexual exploitation, what is their ultimate goal? What is their ultimate society? Obviously free of Christians, free of Jews, right?
Well, look at the global elite network, right? So we've been talking about this global network at the higher scale, the elite scale. So what are their goals? It is the demise of Western civilization, to build this kind of satanic, anti-God, demonic force that exterminates. This is not about a race. This is not about white people. This is about the extermination of the people of God. And this is throughout the literature. So I've been reading from experts, my former colleagues, and they all mention that they're trying to destroy the foundations of Western society and civilization. Now, the jihadis think they're going to bring in Islam. So they're just, working together for this demise of the Judeo-Christian values. And I firmly believe the Muslims think that the LGBT and the other groups, the Marxist groups, are just fodder for hellfire. They're just, using them to achieve what they want, and then they're just going to supplant Islam. But together, these two forces just want the destruction of everything America represents today. That's why I'm really hoping and praying this doesn't stay a left-right thing. It has to be an American thing against what's anti-American. And stop legitimizing these movements as part of progressive ideology. They're demonic and they're anti-American and they're anti-establishment. The non-Christians don't want to talk about good versus evil or the demonic, but you can talk about anti-establishment and being anti-American, anti-capitalism, anti-freedom for all the values and the respect for society. Just the ability to counter violence, that abject violence is unacceptable. Political violence is unacceptable. I really pray that that's where we will eventually be able to come together, but it's not entirely clear.
We know that in Hitler's time, the objective was the elimination of the Jews. And the Grand Mufti of Palestine, a Muslim Brotherhood guy, was given an apartment in Berlin, given the airwaves. They translated Hitler's Mein Kampf, my struggle, into my jihad. We know the PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization, in the early 2000s were still distributing that to their people in their language. So when they were done exterminating the Jews in Europe, Hitler said, we'll go over to Palestine, Philistine, the false name, and we will exterminate the Jews there. And of course, they never got that far. But the Grand Mufti was calling them, and he recruited tens of thousands of Muslims to wear the Nazi uniform that we have pictures of, wearing the sword of Islam with the Nazi symbols on their uniforms, on their collars. We have the black and white photos of this. And their objective was the murder of Jews. But in the process, we know that Hitler was also taking down the institution of the church, that they dissolved the churches, their church denominations, and they united under the Reich bishop. They removed the Bible, put in Mein Kampf. They took down the cross, put up a swastika. They were merging their so-called Christianity, much of them who were into replacement theology already, had long done away with the Jews and were already buying into some form of anti-Semitism, and they merged it with the Nazism. And this is, of course, why you have some of them who were parading around with, at their church denominations, the cross with the swastika. But their goal was the destruction of the church, the real church, as you will, Bible-believing churches, with destruction of the Jews. How is that any different? The Jews are being targeted, practicing Jews, real Jews that really believe in Judaism are being targeted. Christians are being slaughtered in their churches, in their worship services, right? A trans gal kills Christian kids at a Christian school in Nashville and Christian teachers. So how is this really any different? You're on a mission and you're partnering with people that either hate the Jews or they hate the Christians or they hate both. They may not all be uniting in their hatred of the Christians. They may not all be uniting in their hatred of the Jews. One may hate the Christians over the Jews. One may hate the Jews over the Christians. But isn't it pretty obvious to you and me that Islam and Marxism are uniting for the destruction of Christianity and Judaism, particularly when you realize that many of them believe the source of all suffering and oppression is Christianity or the Judeo-Christian ethic? So isn't the agenda really, Satan is really doing the same thing he was doing with Hitler and the Nazis? He's doing it again. It's just a different form, and now it seems to be global.
Yeah, it's brilliant analysis, nothing new under the sun. And that's why these groups like O9A and 764 are looking at Hitler literature. So it's not because this is focused just on the Jews, it's focused on Judeo-Christian society writ large. And I'm happy to report that there are scholars out there that are looking at this and identifying it and recognizing it. And I'm sure the Trump administration is going to pour a whole bunch of money into investigating these groups. I see already, projects that are underway and papers that have been written. So mind you, we now have this giant shift from Biden's DOJ and all of those funding mechanisms that we're going towards, and I bring a lot of those up in my book. We're going after the RMVEs, the white supremacists, and now all of those resources and grant projects now need to shift to go after the NVEs. And so that becomes the challenge in the administration reformatting itself to address the new threat. And hopefully we don't end up 3 years from now, back at square one. That's just the way our patterns of government go.
So you provided us with this slide. You want to talk about this slide?
So back in 2016, when I was at the FBI, we were developing intervention models. And the premise was that you needed to partner with the community. If you wanted to intervene in a radicalized individual or potentially radicalized a person, you needed the community's help. So community groups, YMCA, schools, you needed all kinds of people to be willing to fight this threat together. So this graphic that I brought up for you is identifying the risk factors. And basically, as this threat morphs, these risk factors, the bullet points within the risk factors can change. But the buckets remain the same. And the idea is these circles overlap because each of these radicalized persons has varying degrees of each of these problems. And our goal is to identify through evidence-based clinical tools when a person reaches a level that is either actionable to violence that needs to be reported to law enforcement or that needs some other intervention tools that are designed to help in each of those circles.
So going forward, what do you see if this trajectory stays the same? What do you see happening next?
So I did some research on where the FBI is in the program. So unfortunately, the program I was a part of was stymied by a Muslim that was over at DOJ that wouldn't approve our policy, and then later was curtailed. Yeah, because everybody was screaming Islamophobia, you're targeting Muslims. And then later, Russiagate is what closed down the program because no policy was implemented during that time during the Russia investigation. So I've been out of the game for a couple years. I looked online to see what's going on with the program, and there are threat assessment and threat management tools that the FBI is doing in coordination with DHS, Department of Homeland Security. I'm not sure how robust they are. I don't know how many people are participating, but at the end of the day, we need to intervene. And there needs to be a mechanism whereby the community can report these threats to multidisciplinary teams, psychologists, school resource officers, imams, or people that could address the ideological threat, and eventually and concurrently with local law enforcement and the FBI. And without those multidisciplinary teams and a more robust intervention model, I don't know how bad this violence is going to get. It's anybody's guess how, because this is so much bigger than converting people to Islam. I really want your audience to understand how dangerous this threat is when you can glorify violence in people by using the jihadi literature and the Hitler literature without telling them, you don't have to hate a particular segment of society, you just have to hate all of society that doesn't agree with you. So you don't have to convert to Islam. We don't care if you convert to Islam, but you have to adhere to these ideologies, these practices and this membership in these kind of occult groups. It provides a sense of belonging for these people. It provides a sense of thrill, this hero culture that a lot of people look at. Luigi Mangione. I mean, is that a debased human being who thinks that his personal grievance allows him to take a life, and the people that glorify him for taking that life? It is that subculture that we're dealing with that is not recognizable by a particular people or group.
That's the guy that took the life of the healthcare CEO.
Exactly.
Just to remind everybody. So if you had to guess at this point, was this kid being radicalized by a collection of people that would include perhaps influence from Islam?
Absolutely. 100%. Well, I mean, your best evidence was what you and Sharon covered in the Queer Alliance. It's run by an Iranian girl. So to what extent are we going to hear about the Iranian funding that movement? How involved? Because when I looked into her, there was associations with her being awarded by the State Department, by the UN for her work. Yes. So we already see the nexus. It's directly connected to him if he was part of that group. And I think that people will start to realize that, and so it's not going to be politically correct to try to bring in the Islamists, because the national Islamic organizations like CARE are going to be like, don't you dare associate us with this stuff because the guy's not Muslim. That doesn't matter. It's the influence of the ideology on the mindset of these criminals.
Do you believe that we are going to continue to see attacks on conservatives and Christians, including more murders? And do you think at some point it behooves them to also make sure that we see the elimination of some people on the left so that you can get them out into the streets fighting each other?
Yeah. Over 400 attacks on Christians in 2024 alone. One of the congressmen reported that during Cash's hearing. 500 on Catholics since 2020. I think that number is going to just continue to rise. So I know in the communities I'm a part of, we have a big event coming up. You and I have a big event coming up. What is our first thought? Okay, what are we doing about security? What are we doing about whether we're attacked? And how are, God forbid, some of those interactions going to play out? Who's going to be the initial aggressor? Who's going to be identified as the aggressor so that it says, oh, well, these right-wing groups are now attacking the trans kids. It's going to be, how does it play out in the media, and how does that vary from the actual facts? I think we're in a very dangerous time. We're in a very dangerous time in this country.
And isn't that part of the goal, is to shut down free speech? So if people become afraid to hold events, don't the Marxists, the Islamists, and those that are against the principles of our republic that include free speech, freedom of religion, the right to public assembly, those very rights start to decrease. And then when people become afraid, and we saw this last Friday night when I went on and did man on the street interviews in Memphis, What do you think of President Trump sending the National Guard into Memphis? As I've told this audience, I don't know if you heard me, I said that there are people that had very strong opinions one way or the other. Some of them very strong, like laced with four-letter words, strong opinions. And I said, aside from the cursing, I want to get this on camera. I'm looking for people with strong opinions on all sides on this. Let's roll the camera, guys, and grab this. And that's when they would say, oh, no. I can't be on camera saying this. Well, why not? You did a perfect job articulating your point. Yeah, but I might lose my job. I might lose friends. I might lose customers, clients. And to me, what I came away with Friday night with those interviews was the more that people are attacked on the right, the middle, the left, and are murdered or shut down, and now Jimmy Kimmel shut down, the more, and I'm not a Jimmy Kimmel fan, I don't like what he said. I think it's a matter of the free market deciding it. I don't think the government should be behind shutting people down like this because he didn't say anything illegal. He didn't cite anybody. So the more we see people being canceled or eliminated, the more people are going to be afraid to speak. And when you stop practicing free speech, when you stop valuing free speech, more then the Islamists, the Marxists, the globalists, these people then win. They then win because we no longer think, oh, wow, I'm not alone. There's a lot of people that believe the way Eddie and Brandon House believe. Well, pretty soon you won't know that because they're all quiet, right? And that's what we saw in communist countries. There'd be people spill into the street when they thought there was going to be the opportunity to overthrow the communist regime, and people would show up in the streets, like in Hungary, and people would say, what are you doing out here? I thought you were a communist. No, I'm not a communist. I just had to act like one to get along to go along. I hate communism. But their fellow citizens thought they were diehard communists. And pretty soon you think you're the minority. And that's how they win.
Right. And I remember J.D. Vance's speech to England criticizing them for regulating social media posts of people that were just talking about what's going on in their country. We don't want to get to that place. We don't want to stop people from dialoguing. I mean, we would be dishonoring Charlie's legacy by doing that. I mean, we want to demonstrate that you kill Charlie, you create a million Charlies. We're all Charlie Kirk. We want to light the inferno of young people and patriots and people saying, no, we don't want less speech, we want more. But the Islamists, they're always one step ahead of us because before they before they used to try to kill Americans just abjectly on the street, identifying themselves, Allah Akbar, and then putting up a flag. But now they're thinking to themselves, wait a minute, why don't we just let the Americans kill each other? And we're really, really at the verge of that tipping point where Americans are at a place where we're willing to kill each other over these issues, not realizing that the impetus has been provided by these jihadi groups.
And isn't that what we saw in the Barack Obama, Michelle Obama movie, Leave the World Behind? The guy's in the truck and he tells the other guy, they want us killing each other. Remember that line in the movie?
Yes, exactly. And that's what, and when we used to war game in the government, I even have slide presentations about it. The biggest threat that Americans face is civil war, because that's really what could destroy our country because of we have an armed population. It would just be a massacre. And I'm really praying there's more like Fettermans out there who will see through this madness and say, wait a minute, people on the left will be like, wait a minute, this isn't what I represent. This isn't what I want for this country. I don't want a communist. I don't want anti-capitalism. I want a free society. I want what my founding fathers want, whether I'm a Christian or a Hindu or a Buddhist. It's believing in what America stands for and our founding principles and being willing to fight for that across party lines.
Are you, in closing, are you shocked today that there's not many people saying what you and I are saying about what the government's leaning on ABC, Disney, when it comes to Jimmy Kimmel? Are you shocked there are not more conservatives saying, constitutionalists, saying what I'm saying tonight? Because I'm kind of disappointed that people are going along with this.
Yeah, it's really disturbing. I think it's a spirit of vengeance. You know, people want revenge and are not thinking of the big picture and how destructive that could be when the shoe was on the other foot. I mean, the shoe was on the other foot in less than a year ago. So I don't know why people have such short memories. How dangerous it is when we weaponize the federal government. We don't want to be weaponizing the federal government.
And, you know, it's going to make the case for, well, when the left is in power, they want to take down the right. When the right's in power, they want to take down the left. So you know what? Maybe what we should just do is go to a neutral, quote, neutral system. Let's just turn it over to AI. Let's turn more of this over to AI. No, I'm not kidding. I think we're going to see more and more push for AI to write legislation, AI to make judicial decisions. And this is what some of my friends who are experts on technocracy are saying. You see what I'm saying?
But wait a minute. But AI is biased. So
that's right.
every time I do an AI investigation of these violent extremism groups, they caveat it as these are actually right-wing groups. These are actually RMP.
I agree. No, I agree.
So
I agree. I'm just saying.
Manipulate the content.
I agree 100%. But I would not be shocked if they're not using the left-right conflict to say, well, we can go to another system, because that's what Peter Thiel is saying. If the choice is Antichrist or Armageddon, maybe there's a third option. And maybe their third option is a system that they promise us will be neutral. Well, I don't buy it, but I wonder how many people are going to increasingly buy it, right? Because
and our Bible promises people will buy it.
What's that?
Our Bible promises people are going to buy it.
Yes, they will. Yes, they will. Well, I'm glad that you see it so clearly, because today I'm distressed and about what's going on with our government leaning on ABC and CBS. I mean, ABC and Disney over Kimmel. Although, again, I'm not pleased with what Kimmel said. But, hey, why are we shutting down free speech all in the name of Charlie Kirk? It seems to be using his name to actually destroy the thing he stood for.
Exactly. You're absolutely right.
resurrectministry.com. And she'll be with us here Friday night, October 3rd, Saturday, October 4th. She'll be speaking at our banquet on Thursday night. I think we got headed to 75 people registered for that banquet already. Awesome. And I've got my grand piano and piano player. We'll do a few numbers, some classic hymns. We had a rehearsal yesterday for that. And I think we have a classical guitar player who's going to come in, who's won a bunch of awards, and he's going to join us in that. And then we'll hear a great keynote presentation by Adia, and that's if you are part of that Thursday night. And then she'll be speaking on Friday night as well. And so we have a wonderful lineup. Come join us in person here in very, very safe Collierville, Tennessee.
I was just going to say, are you going to tell everybody they're going to be safe?
Well, it's safe right now, but I can't promise you anything. Like my wife said, Brandon, if they want you dead, they'll kill you. My wife's pretty much like, you know, it is what it is. If they want you dead, they're going to kill you. I'm like,
our days are numbered.
That's what she said. That's right. That's right. So we're having conversations about all this, and we're looking at all the security around Charlie Kirk, and what good did that do?
Right.
So we've gone from like, oh, wow, we have to ramp up all this security to, okay, we need security, but I'm not so sure that we can promise anyone that nothing's going to happen. And I said to my wife today, you know what's interesting, babe? You and I started Worldview Weekends in February of 1993, held 300 Worldview Weekends around the country. And now today, if you are a public speaker, if you are at all controversial, when you get up to speak, you have no guarantee that someone is not going to get up on the stage and stab you like they did to the guy that got his eye. Who?
The Assyrian Christian that was gunned down in Europe. That was stabbed in Europe.
Or the guy in New York a couple years ago. The guy that went undercover for so many years because he wrote about Islam. What was his name? And they got him in the eye. Salman Rushdie, right?
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Theo Van Gogh.
So the guy jumped on the stage and slit his throat, and if a doctor hadn't have been there, he wouldn't have survived, right? Exactly. When you get up and speak today, you have no guarantee that someone's not going to jump on the stage and slit your throat. You have no guarantee someone's going to pull out a gun and shoot you. And I said to my wife, these are the facts today. Charlie Kirk was surrounded by security, and they could not stop it, okay? So if someone's intent on killing you, they're going to kill you. And so anyone attending a conference, an event of any kind, has got to decide, is free speech and our principles worth laying down our life for? While the chance of being killed or assaulted may be statistically very, very low, are you willing to take that chance? If so, go to an event. But nobody can guarantee 100% safety today. I'm sorry.
Absolutely. And I'd also like to advise people to have situational awareness. As
Yes.
former law enforcement, I will tell you, look around, watch your six. Just know your exit ways, know suspicious people, say something, do something, so if you see somebody walk in with a suspicious backpack, think about how many people were videotaping this guy on the roof. Why didn't somebody start screaming, man on the roof, and disrupt the conference? So we have to be willing to also speak up and to all be citizens, like
Yep.
a citizen army that's aware and willing to say something. Just start screaming,
Yep.
whatever
100%.
it takes, so
Yep.
people also have to do their part to help keep themselves safe.
100%. ResurrectMinistry.com, ResurrectMinistry.com. Great interview. We learned a lot tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brandon, for having me.
Look
God
forward to
bless
having you here in just a few weeks. It's going to be awesome. Thank you. God bless you. Folks, do you appreciate what we're doing here? That was an amazing conversation. You know what? We could keep it really shallow. We could do the right, left, keep it really shallow, have a bigger audience, and make more money. Because the bigger the audience, the more advertising, the more sales. But you know what? I'm tired of that. I've never been into that. You guys know that, right? And I said to one of my friends today, talk radio in America has largely become not about informing people, but about entertaining them and distracting them from the real issues. Entertaining them and distracting them. So if you want to be entertained, you've come to the wrong place. Although I think at times we're very entertaining, don't you, Logan? But if you want to be educated, this is what we do. By having intentional conversations with people like we just did in order to get to the root of the issues and understand the times. And I am not marketing and programming to the masses because the average person in America, I'm sorry, is not interested in learning and being discerning and being a workman, rightfully dividing the word of truth. We are programming to a select group of people, and you're one of them. And if you appreciate the intentional programming we do here, we need your support. So please go to worldviewfoundation.com. Help us continue to push out the programming. Worldviewfoundation.com. Thank you for that. We'll be right back after this break.
I'll tell you one little quick story. We had a Worldview Weekend client who lived in California, lost their house. Very wealthy guy. He didn't use Bitcoin. He came over here, drove to Arizona with $286,000 worth of his gold because he had no money and no house available. His bank was shut down because he couldn't have access to his bank account.
Was this during the fire? Was this during the fires?
During the fire. Didn't have his driver's license. He lost it. The state wouldn't give him a new license because he had no active mailing address. Real mess. So he came to Arizona to buy a house. He's moving everything over. He said, the only thing I got in my possession that I can get liquid with right now is my gold. I gave him a check for $286,000. And guess what? I didn't need his social, his driver's license. Sort of smiled. And I said, I know you and Brandon talked about how this worked, but boy, this is great. I feel good. I got my money. Nobody bothered me, and I'm protected, and it's private. So you people out there who are sitting on your hands when Wes and I are sending you these requests and Brandon and you are talking to you, you better get active because you're going to pay me $4,000 an ounce the end of the year. Trust me.
You better get your. I highly suggest you get your free packet. You don't have to do anything. It's free, no obligation. Just simply go to worldviewgold.com, fill out the form, worldviewgold.com, or just text Wes and give him your name and address and say, I want the free packet. That's all you got to do. 602-558-8585, 602-558-8585.